If you've ever wondered how people get those third-person perspective shots or those B-roll shots of maps, well, it's actually really easy to do. It only requires a little bit of planning and a couple of friends, which actually, now that I'm saying that, might make this the hardest tutorial I've ever made. So before we get started, we need to know what we're trying to record. Is it B-roll of a map or is it a third-person perspective shot? B-roll of a map only requires 2 people. One friend to be on attacker or defender, and then you in observer mode. Third-person perspective shots require 3 people. One friend to play attacker, another to play defender, and then you in observer mode. Your friends are going to act out the scene, and you're going to watch them in observer mode, so this way you don't have anything distracting like the character model's hands. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I record these and how I also edit them. So here we are in Valorant. I've queued us up into a custom game. Armpit Odor is an alt account. I have 2 computers, thankfully, and I'm going to go into observer mode. Now, to make my life easier, what I'm going to do is turn on allow cheats. Now, the next thing you want to do is turn off your UI. You don't want to have that distracting your viewer, so go into your settings. Go to general, scroll all the way down until you see hide user interface in game. And then it's also helpful to know that if you go all the way down to the bottom, you can change camera speed in observer mode. Now there's 2 more settings that we need to know, and that is how to turn off player outlines and how to actually get into free camera mode. So if we go into controls, interface, this is where we can find that. You'll see we have observer and then toggle free camera, that's set to V, and then no outlines, that's L. I think that these are still the default settings, but I would just double check just in case. With that out of the way, we can actually queue into the custom game now. But before you do that, make sure you tell your friends which agents to pick if you're trying to get those third-person perspective shots so you don't waste their time. So this is what you'll be greeted with. Unfortunately, as observer, you can't turn on any cheats. So ask your friends to go into their settings. At the top right, you'll see cheats, and then they can pause the match timer and turn on any cheats that they find necessary. Once that's all set up, it's time to actually get your recordings. If you remember to go into free camera mode, we hit V, and then you can just freely zoom around here. Now the other keybind that we needed to remember was player outlines, because right now we can see Yoru through this wall. So if we just hit L, he goes away. Now that you got everything set up, it's time to get your cinematics. What I'm doing is getting some B-roll of the map. It's very helpful to get a few different shots so you can pick the best one in post. And then I'm also going to get a few shots of Yoru so that we can edit them as an example. I'm also going to show you a really neat trick that you can use to speed up the editing process. We're going to use green screen and then composite the image in DaVinci Resolve. All right, here we are in DaVinci Resolve. I'm in the edit tab right now, and we are going to be editing the B-roll shot of the map, and we're going to be doing most of our work in Fusion, so let's jump right into it. The first thing that I like to do is add a transform node. This will allow me to get some more dynamic camera movement as well as recompose the shot so that way it's framed perfectly. You can find a transform node in the hotbar up here, and if you ever forget what these are, you can just hover over them. But I don't know why it's not showing up right now. Just take my word for it, drop it into your pipeline. And the other thing that I like to do is right click somewhere on my grid and then go to arrange tools and click to grid. So now our nodes will snap into place and they're not just floating about. And from here, what I'm going to do is mess around with the size and maybe the centering, maybe add a bit of tilt or something like that. And if you ever wanted to reset one of these settings, all you have to do is click on this little dot right here. You can also double click on the name of the setting you're trying to reset. But let's just say that this node is completely messed up. All these things are just whack, and you don't want to have to reset everything individually. Well, at the top right hand corner, you'll see this little arrow, and if you just click that, it resets the entire node. So what I've done is added a size and angle keyframe at the beginning and end of my video, so I get a little bit more dynamic camera movement, but it also gives you this eerie feeling, which I think matches this reactor. Now this looks pretty good, but it still doesn't look cinematic-y, and that's because it's missing just something, and we can add a few things to it. The first thing that we can do is add some lighting effects. So what we're going to do is hit shift space to bring up the select tool page, and then we're going to type in glow. Now all three of these do about the same thing. You can mess around with them if you want, but I'm going to choose the middle one. Now you can see that it brightened up this area a little bit, and we have a little bit more brightness at the top, and this just gives it a more realistic look. The next lighting effect we're going to add is light rays. Once again, we're going to hit shift space, type in light rays. Whoop, I already had that. Light rays. Now this is obviously overexposed, so I'm going to mess around with the settings here, adjust my threshold, brightness, length, softness, all of that until I get something that I like. But I really only want light rays coming from the top part of my video. So what we're going to do is a lazy mask. What I've done is brought my playhead to the beginning of my video, and now we're going to drop in a polygon node. This is going to act as our mask, and you can find it in the hotbar. Connect that to the blue arrow of your light rays node, and then just outline the area where you want light rays. Now what you can do is bring your playhead to the end of your video and then adjust your mask accordingly, and DaVinci Resolve will automatically add a keyframe for you. Now this looks pretty good, but the problem is that the outline of our mask is actually hiding a very defined hard edge. We can see underneath it by unchecking show view controls. A simple fix is by going over to your settings and then bringing up soft edge until that line goes away. Another thing that I like to add is a bit of blur around the edges so our eyes can focus on the center. So let's bring up that select tool page again, type in radial blur. I'm going to bring down the strength of it just a little bit. And then what we're going to do is connect an ellipse node to it to act as another mask. And right now the blur is only in the ellipse, so we want it on the outside, and all we have to do is go over to our settings and then check invert. Normally at this point I would adjust the size of the ellipse, but I really like its size right now. So the only thing we have to do is adjust our soft edge so it blends in a little bit better. At this point, we're pretty much done as far as effects go. So the last step is adding motion blur. In order to do that, you have to bring up the select tool page, type in optical flow, bring it up once again, and type in vector motion blur. Now there isn't going to be a lot of motion blur in this video just because there isn't a lot of motion, but it's that little bit of blur that makes all the difference. Now this is what the video looked like before any editing, and this is the video after all the editing plus color grading. So now that we have map B-roll, it's time to move on to character B-roll. So this is the video that we're going to be editing, and the process is very similar to the map B-roll. The main difference here is that I like to add camera movement that accentuates the character movement. We're going to start off by adding blur to our video, but we're not going to do it in the same way that we added blur to the map video. Let's start off by bringing up a blur node. I'm going to hit shift space. You can type in blur, but I like using depth blur. You can use anyone that you like. And right now it looks like we didn't add any blur, but if we go over to our settings and we start messing around, you can see that we have blur now. So what we need to do is create a mask for our blur. So we're going to grab the polygon node, drop that in, and connect it to the blue arrow. And we're just going to start masking. So something like this. And now let's start adding that blur. Nice. If you notice, I have my playhead at the beginning of my video, and that's because I only have to add 2 keyframes since I'm dollying in here. So if we go to the end of our video, all we have to do is adjust the sizing of our mask. And now DaVinci Resolve automatically animates it, so we don't have to go through frame by frame. But let's try and get some more dynamic camera movement out of this. I want it to kind of explode with his hands. So let's drop in a transform node. This is going to act as our camera. And we're going to bring the size up. So we're zoomed in here. We're going to add a keyframe. Then we're going to adjust our playhead to the end of this animation where his hands extend out. And we're going to bring this size back down. So now if we watch this back, boom, kind of explodes with his hands. Another thing that we can do is kind of add a tilting up look. Now, the best thing to do is get this actually in game so you don't have to add it in post, but you can adjust it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is add a center keyframe right here, bring my playhead to the beginning of my video. And then what I'm going to do is adjust my Y settings. Maybe bring it up. Let's see how this looks. The playback in Fusion can be a little slow, so let's watch this in the Edit tab. That looks really good, but I feel like there just isn't enough movement after his hands explode. So what we can do is add a little bit of camera shake here. You can add camera shake in the Edit tab, but I prefer to keep all of my effects in one area. So let's head back into Fusion. This is when we go back to our regular size. And that's where I want to add the camera shake. So let's bring up that select tool page, type in camera shake. So you have these two different camera shake nodes. And again, they do about the same thing. You can mess around with them if you want, but I'm just going to use the regular camera shake node. And because this is the frame that we have the size keyframe on, I'm going to add a keyframe for motion scale. Then I'm going to move one frame back and adjust my motion scale to 0. So now when we hit this keyframe, we get a little bit of camera shake, actually a lot of bit of camera shake. And just kind of somewhere at the end, I'm going to adjust it to 0. And let's see what this looks like. All right, that's way too much camera shake. So we got to adjust our motion scale down, maybe even our speed scale. And we can adjust the other settings as well. All right, that looks pretty good. I don't like how circular the camera shake looks. So I'm just going to keep messing around with those settings until I find something that I like. Nice, that's looking a lot better now. So the last thing that we have to do is add motion blur. So like before, bring up the select tool page, type in optical flow, bring it up once again, type in vector motion blur. And there you go. So this is the before and this is the after with effects and color grading. So the last thing that we're going to do is compositing. We're going to merge this video with this video. Yoru is standing in front of a green screen, so it's going to be very easy to remove him from this video and then place him in our background video. The reason why we're going to do this is because it allows us to freely edit the background video without having to do a lot of masking. So let's start off by removing Yoru from that video. We're going to jump into the Fusion tab, bring up the select tool page and type in Delta Keyer. Now all you have to do is go into your inspector, find this eyedropper tool and drop it on your green screen. Now because we have all these other elements, we have to do a little bit of masking, but luckily it can be some lazy masking. We just have to create an outline in the beginning of our video and then adjust it at the end of our video. So go into your hotbar, grab a polygon node, drop it into your grid, and then connect it to the lower right hand arrow of your Delta Keyer. From here, create a basic outline of your subject. And now go into your inspector and check invert. Look at that. Next, bring your playhead to the beginning of your video and adjust your mask accordingly. When you go back into the edit tab, your video should look like this. Pop it into video track number 2 so you can layer it on top of your background video, and if you watch it back, this is what it should look like. The only thing that I have to do is trim my foreground video so that the camera movement matches the background video. To do this, I'm going to disable video track number 1 so I can only focus on video track number 2, and then I'm going to use my playhead to find where the camera starts moving, place it there, and then move my cursor over to the left-hand part of my video, and then drag it until it meets my playhead. The last thing that I have to do is adjust Yoru's position so it doesn't look like he's just floating in space. To do this, all I'm going to do is use the transform in the inspector of the edit tab. With that out of the way, we can finally start working on the background video. Now, just like the other two examples, we're going to be adding blur and a little bit of lighting effects. So I don't think I need to go over this again because it's going to be edited in the same way. Back in the edit tab, we're going to convert this into a compound clip so that way we can easily add a dolly zoom effect. So highlight both videos, right click them, and then at the top, you'll see a new compound clip. At the end of your video, you're going to place a zoom keyframe, then go to the beginning of your video and adjust the zoom until your foreground is about the same size as the end of your video. DaVinci Resolve will automatically add a keyframe, and if you play your video back, you should have this really neat distortion effect. Like always, the last thing we have to do is add motion blur, but we can't do that to a compound clip. It ends up glitching out and then you have to redo your work. So what we need to do is render it in place. Right click your video and then you'll see render in place. Now you can add motion blur and this is the end result. So there you go. That is how I make the cinematics for all of my Valorant montages. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I will do my best to answer all of them. You can also join my Discord. I will have the link in the description, and you can find other like-minded people to help you with your edits. Anyways, I gotta get going, so I will catch you in the next one.